Okay, and our first speaker is Professor Chris Gill, who is Emeritus Professor from the University of Exeter. Chris is a leading expert in ancient Stoicism, has been published extensively on Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and other important Roman Stoics. So he's going to introduce us today to a few themes in ancient Stoicism. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you very much. Is the volume okay? Okay, very nice to be talking to you all. One of the key messages of Stoic ethics, perhaps the key message, is, and one we stress in various ways in the Stoic Week Handbook, if you're following that, is that all human beings are capable of achieving happiness by their own efforts. And this is because happiness, or flourishing, eudaimonia in Greek, depends ultimately not on acquiring external things such as money or status, or even health, or the well-being of our families, but on developing virtue or the virtues. The virtues are the set of qualities that are essential to a human life. Qualities such as wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. Stoics believe that all human beings are fundamentally capable of developing these virtues. In that sense, we all have the basis for creating our own happiness. It is up to us, or within our power. They also believe that virtue alone is good in a complete sense, whereas the other things which we value, which it is natural for us to value, such as health, are of a lower order. They are, in Stoic terminology, preferred indifference. They're indifferent, but some are preferred or preferable to others. But if this is right, the question naturally arises, what value do we place on relationships with other people? If our happiness depends on ourselves and not ultimately on others and on their survival and well-being, what room is there for love and commitment to others? And some modern scholars, such as Richard Sorabji and Martha Nussbaum, have questioned whether there is room for love in the full sense within Stoicism. And they talk about Stoic detachment from other people. They refer especially to Stoic ideas about accepting the death of those who are close to us, ideas which I'll discuss a bit later on. In ancient Greece and Rome, incidentally, no one, as far as I know, criticized the Stoics for interpersonal detachment of this kind. So this is, interestingly, a purely modern criticism. I think the view that Stoics are detached from other people is mistaken, and that Stoicism places a very positive value on interpersonal and social relationships, as we suggest in the Thursday section of the Stoic Week Handbook. Do come in and find a seat. I'm sure there are places. There's a place, and there are others. Do come in. There's plenty of room if you don't mind ferreting around. Okay. And Donald Robertson will be pursuing the idea of Stoic love in his workshop this afternoon. However, I do recognize that there's a challenge we need to meet to show how the idea that happiness depends ultimately on us is compatible with giving a profound value to other people and our relationship to them. So that's the challenge I want to address briefly today. One way of approaching this question is through Stoic ideas about ethical development. Stoics believe that our whole life as human beings, and not just our youth or middle adult years, can and should consist of an ongoing process of ethical development or self-transformation. The target or norm for this process is achieving wisdom, and so enabling wisdom and the other virtues to shape all aspects of our lives. This is a perfect or ideal goal, and none of us will achieve it fully, though aiming for the goal is still the best way for us to live our lives. This process of development is sometimes subdivided in Stoic writings into two strands. Do come in, there's plenty of room. One centers on an idea, if you don't go up Mac, towards the back, that happiness depends on developing the virtues in ourselves. That's one strand. And the Stoics believe that as human beings, we're instinctively or naturally attracted towards things such as health or property, but that as we develop as rational agents, we learn how to select such things properly. And we gradually learn that what matters ultimately is not acquiring these things for their own sake, but doing so wisely, or in a way that expresses our growing understanding of the virtues, so that over time, things other than virtue become secondary. They become preferred indifference in this terminology of the Stoics. So that's one strand in ethical development. The other strand is a social one. Stoics believe that all animals, and not just human beings, are instinctively motivated to care for others of their kind, a motive shown most clearly in parental love for offspring, as Patrick just mentioned with the nappies. Human beings, as rational animals, are naturally able, and the Stoics think naturally motivated, to express this desire in more complex ways than other animals. One way is through sustained involvement in family, friendship, and communal or political life. The other is coming to recognize that all human beings, as rational animals who share this capacity for ethical development, are like brothers and sisters to us, or like fellow citizens in the human world community. This view of human development raises two important questions. In social development, how should we interpret the relationship between local and universal involvement? More broadly, how should we interpret the relationship between the two strands in development, between development in moral understanding and development in social involvement? These are quite challenging questions, and ones which actually are not addressed directly in surviving Stoic theoretical writings, but there's a great deal of Stoic material which is relevant to them, especially in Stoic writers on practical ethics, such as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. I take first the question of the relationship between the two aspects of social development. Should we suppose that as we develop ethically, we're meant to stop caring about our family and friends and care only about humanity in general, or at least to draw no ethical distinction between these two groups of people? I'm pretty sure this is not what the Stoics have in mind. Stoic writings talk about extending outwards the circle of our concern from family to humanity. But this makes no sense unless we still have a special concern for our family and friends to extend to others. Stoic teachers also suggest that we should use the idea of the brotherhood of humankind as a way of guiding and regulating our more local relationships. If we're inclined to become angry and irritated at others' wrongdoing, or to cheat or shortchange other people in our financial and business life, we should check this inclination by reminding ourselves that they are our brothers and sisters in humankind. So the Stoic view, I think, is that we should try to develop both kinds of relationships with family, friends, and community, and with humanity in general, including, of course, specific people falling outside our local circle, and do so in a sustained and deeply thought-out way. Also, we should use both kinds of relationship to inform and enrich each other. This seems to me very valuable advice in the modern world, where we're very often trying to juggle and make sense of the interplay between local and global relationships, a theme which I think is one of those which will be explored by Patrick Usher and Gabriele Galuzzo in their workshop on Stoicism and social media and IT. What about the relationship between the two strands in ethical development, the social strand and the question of moral understanding? I think the same general principle holds good. The two strands are not meant to be quite distinct and separate, as though you could carry out one kind of development without the other. Rather, the idea is that they're interconnected and that they contribute significantly to each other. Take first development in moral understanding. Although this is something that each of us must undertake for ourselves, and so in that sense it falls within our power, it's hard or even impossible to imagine how we could do this without social involvement and without also developing within our social relations. This applies especially to virtues that are social in character, such as courage and justice, but they apply in different ways to all the virtues. We develop our understanding of the virtues by observing and interacting with other people who seem to embody the virtues, in part at least, in their lives. And Marcus Aurelius writes about this very powerfully in Book 1 of his Meditations, all the people who have enriched his understanding of virtue through his life. Also, family and communal contexts are ones in which we begin to learn by our own actions and our own feelings what it means to try to embody the virtues ourselves. On the other side, our social involvement will only form a proper part of our ethical development if we also bring to bear in this context our growing understanding of what is truly valuable in human life. Well, this is all perhaps a bit abstract, so let's try and make it a bit more specific. And these examples all allude to some striking passages in Epictetus's discourses. So let's imagine an aspiring Stoic father or mother with a very sick child. Will he or she stay by the bedside and do all he can or she can to make the child better? Or will they think, in line with what appears to be Stoic doctrine, that health is of only secondary value compared with virtue, so it doesn't much matter whether he stays by the bedside or not? Of course, the Stoic father or mother will stay by the bedside, and they will do all they can for the child. They will do that because health is something we are all naturally inclined to promote in Stoic theory of value, and they'll do that because that's the appropriate way to act as a way of expressing virtue. The virtues of parenthood are expressed in trying to care for the health of your child. So that's perhaps a rather straightforward case, but let's imagine something rather more complex. A father or mother with a rather older or adult son or daughter. Supposing it becomes clear that the son or daughter only value the relationship between parent and offspring in terms of external goods, in terms of the money or status that they get from the relationship. What does the aspiring father do now, the aspiring Stoic father do now, or mother? Well, he needs to change the way he acts towards the son, and so to try to get his son to change the way he thinks about what is valuable. This can lead to conflict, but the conflict is unavoidable. If the father is to act according to his own developing moral understanding, and if he is also to try to develop his son's understanding also. And of course, on a Stoic view, the greatest benefit that any person can confer on another is to promote, to encourage their development of virtue, and so their movement towards happiness. So I think there's a very rich vein of advice embedded in Epictetus and other writings about this interplay between the two strands of ethical development and how they can, and how reflecting on these can help us shape our lives and our relationships. What then of the criticism of Stoic ethics I mentioned earlier? the idea that the Stoics advocate detachment from other people, this modern view. I hope it's becoming clear that this criticism is misplaced. But let's take a moment to consider a point which has led especially to this criticism: Stoic acceptance of the prospect of death, including the death of those close to us. And here is a famous passage from Epictetus whenever you take delight in anything, call to mind the opposite impression. What harm is there in saying, beneath your breath, as you're kissing your child, tomorrow you'll die, or similarly to your friend, tomorrow you'll go abroad, or I will, and we'll never see one another again. And there's a slightly different version in the handbook. Now, often cited, Epictetus knows his advice is shocking. He calls it ill-omened. But what underlies the advice? The critics of Stoicism think that it's part of a program of detachment from other people. We keep our own happiness by insulating ourselves from other people, so we're not concerned with them. Well, I don't think it's that. I think it's a number of other things which are going on, which inform this advice. Partly it is an example of preparation for adversity, for things going wrong, which is the theme for today in the Stoic Week Handbook. Epictetus reminds his listeners of something that is indeed a fact, though one we mostly prefer to ignore, namely that death is just as much a part of the life cycle as birth, and that in any close relationship, such as those in family or friendship, one partner will inevitably die before the other. Also, Epictetus assumes the Stoic framework of value, according to which our death, or that of someone close to us, is not the worst thing that can happen to us. The worst thing, in strict Stoic theory, the only bad thing, would be that we, or the other person, becomes utterly morally corrupt, a mass murderer, or a master criminal. That's much worse. That's of a different order of badness. That is truly bad. Epictetus is assuming the general point I made earlier, that we should bring to bear on our social relationships, our developing moral understanding, our grasp of what is and is not most valuable in human life, given our human existence as integral parts of the natural universe, which includes, as part of its natural processes, death as well as birth. Of course, it's hard for us in such situations to apply this principle consistently, as the Stoics are well aware. But this does not mean that the principle itself is not well grounded. And what is involved, I think, is not a systematic policy of detachment, but an attempt to develop towards wisdom while being profoundly involved in human relationships. Thank you very much.